I always thought my family loved me. I thought we were the kind of family people wrote about in magazines. Sunday dinners, laughter echoing through the halls, and that kind of love that felt unbreakable. My dad's voice made me feel safe, steady like a lighthouse, and my mom's hands had this way of making everything okay, even on the worst days. My brother Daniel, though older and often distant, always made me feel like I was protected, like I mattered. I grew up wrapped in that love, never questioning it, never wondering if it was real. But then came that April evening when everything changed. The rain had just started whispering against the windows, and I overheard them, my parents, in the kitchen, voices low, urgent, and full of fear. "She can't know, Michael," my mother said, voice shaking. "If she finds out, everything we built will fall apart." And then my father's voice, cold and sharp. "She was never meant to know. Not after what happened." I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I wanted to convince myself it wasn't about me, that I had misheard. But deep down, I knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every hug, every smile the next morning felt fake, like I was in a play where everyone else already knew their lines, but I didn't. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I had never seen before. The way my dad's eyes darted away when I asked questions. How Daniel would quickly change the subject if I brought up old memories. The way Mom's smile seemed forced, fragile. Even the old photo albums started to feel strange. Pages missing and years erased. The house that once felt alive now pulsed with secrets. I began searching quietly, first through drawers, then in boxes tucked in the attic, pretending to clean while my mind screamed for answers. Every discovery made my chest tighten. A birth certificate that looked too new, hospital documents from places I had never been, letters from a woman I didn't know, all dated the year I was 1. The pieces didn't fit, but they formed something terrifying. Maybe I wasn't who I thought I was. When Mom caught me rifling through a chest, she froze, staring at me with eyes I had never seen before. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice trembling. I lied. "Just looking for old paintings." She looked at me for what felt like forever, then muttered, "Some things are better left buried." But I couldn't leave it buried. Once you see a lie, it claws at you. And inside me, I felt something grow. A determination, a fire. I didn't know it yet, but I was ready to uncover the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. And when I did, I knew things would never be the same again. I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about their voices, about the way everything I thought I knew suddenly felt like a lie. Every corner of the house seemed to hide a secret. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every hug a mask. I started paying closer attention, pretending to be distracted while my eyes and ears hunted for the truth. It began with small things. Documents tucked in drawers, old letters hidden behind frames, receipts from places I'd never been. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut. But I couldn't stop. The more I uncovered, the more the illusion of my family crumbled. I found an envelope, dusty and heavy, addressed to someone else. But when I opened it, the words made my hands shake. It spoke about adoption, about a deal made in secrecy, about a life that was never meant to belong to me in the way I believed. I wasn't the daughter they claimed I was. The realization hit harder than I imagined it would. Everything, every compliment, every tear shed at my accomplishments, every "we're proud of you" was carefully placed to cover the truth. I thought about Daniel. Did he know? Had he always known? I confronted him in the kitchen one afternoon, trying to sound casual, but my chest was tight and my voice unsteady. Do you know something about me?" I asked. He froze, avoided my gaze, and muttered, "You shouldn't be looking into things like that." That avoidance confirmed everything. Even he was part of the act, or at least complicit in keeping the lie alive. I felt betrayed, not just by my parents, but by everyone I thought loved me. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory, every laugh, every moment I thought had been real. I realized that love, in their world, wasn't unconditional. It was a tool, a shield, a way to manipulate. Anger began to swell inside me, simmering under fear and confusion. I didn't just want answers anymore. I wanted justice, a reckoning for the years of deceit. But before I could think about revenge, I needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal. I started retracing my earliest memories, calling distant relatives, even hiring a private investigator under the guise of a personal project, desperate for proof. Every little piece of evidence led to more questions, more lies, and more sleepless nights. I discovered names I had never heard, connections to people who didn't belong in my life, financial transfers, legal papers hidden behind the facade of family normalcy. The more I uncovered, the more I felt like I was walking through a house of mirrors, each reflection showing me a distorted version of the life I thought I lived. And then, finally, I found the thing that made my blood run cold. A letter addressed to my parents, written by the very person whose life they had stolen mine from. They had orchestrated everything, silenced her, and built a new life on top of the ashes of someone else's. I read it again and again, unable to breathe, unable to move. My family wasn't just hiding a secret, they had rewritten reality itself, including mine. That night I sat in the dark, shaking, feeling the full weight of what had been done to me. I realized I had two choices: crumble under the truth, letting it define me, or fight back, exposing the lies, reclaiming the life they had tried to steal. And even as fear and doubt clawed at me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not anymore. After nights of pacing my room and going over every detail I had uncovered, I realized that anger alone wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan, patience, and the precision of someone who had been betrayed but refused to stay powerless. I started documenting everything: the lies, the hidden documents, the secrets that had been kept from me all my life. Every word they had ever said to me, every "I love you," every smile that had once felt real, I cataloged it in my mind like a ledger of betrayal. I watched them closely, learning their habits, their routines, the tiny cracks in their carefully constructed facade. It was exhausting, emotionally brutal, but I could feel myself sharpening, growing stronger, more focused. I began to weave small manipulations, testing their reactions, planting tiny seeds of doubt between them just to see if the perfect family mask could crack under pressure. At first, it felt petty, almost childish, leaving documents slightly out of place, asking pointed questions, feigning ignorance. But the subtle chaos it caused thrilled me in ways I didn't expect. And then I found leverage I hadn't anticipated. A series of old emails, financial statements, and contract revealed not just the original betrayal, but a network of deception that reached beyond my parents, implicating friends, family friends, even legal advisors. They had built a world of lies that required constant maintenance, and I suddenly had the tools to dismantle it, piece by piece. I started planning my moves carefully. I couldn't rush. I had to make them see the truth in a way that would hurt. Not physically, but deep. In the places they thought were untouchable. Their pride, their security, their sense of control. Every interaction became a calculated step. Every word measured. Every smile a weapon. I reached out to distant relatives I had once ignored, gently probing for information, listening for clues. Some were hesitant, but a few gave me whispers of confirmation, proof that I was on the right path. And all the while, I reminded myself of the fire that had sparked in me the day I discovered their betrayal. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity, the pieces of me they had buried under lies. At night, I would sit with a notebook, outlining scenarios, plotting confrontations, rehearsing conversations in my head until they felt real, tangible, inevitable. I felt a thrill I had never experienced before. Power. For the first time, I realized that the helpless little girl I once was, the one who had blindly trusted every word, no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone who understood the rules of the game, someone willing to do what was necessary to make sure the truth would finally see the light of day. And though a part of me feared the consequences, another part reveled in the clarity, the sharp focus that came with purpose. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was preparing to take back everything that had been stolen from me. My identity, my sense of self, my dignity. And when the time came, when the pieces were all in place, they would finally see me. Not the obedient, trusting daughter they had molded, but the storm they had never anticipated. A force shaped by betrayal, patience, and an unrelenting need for justice. When everything was in place, I felt a strange calm, like the moment before a storm breaks and the air tastes of electricity. Months of gathering documents, cultivating allies, and planting quiet doubts had led to this brittle stillness. I could have exposed them in whispers, leaked emails to a cousin, a tick to someone at the bank who handled their accounts, but I wanted them to feel the truth as I had felt it, sudden, unavoidable, and humiliating in the places they thought were safest. So I chose the family dinner, our old Sunday ritual, the one they used to hide behind when guests came by, invited just enough people so the room would carry the weight of witnesses, and sat quietly while they served dessert, smiling the way they always expected me to. The conversation was small, polite, the strained kind that happens when people know there's a history there, but not the details. I listened, cataloged, and when the moment came, I did something I had rehearsed 100 times inwardly, but never imagined I would do out loud. I stood, cleared my throat, and told them, slowly, deliberately, how I had found the papers, how the birth records didn't match, how the hospital named in those documents had no trace of my mother's claim, how the letter from the woman whose life had been erased lay hidden in a drawer for decades. I watched their faces shift, surprise, then fear, then the practiced composure of people who have been caught. My voice didn't shake. The trembling had been burned away by months of cold anger and quiet preparation. I showed the proof. Copies of bank transfers, notarized statements from a woman who had once loved the person my family had taken, correspondence that tied their actions to legal maneuvers they had thought secure. People around the table gasped, murmured. A distant aunt's hand flew to her mouth. Someone at the far end of the room whispered a curse. Daniel's fork clattered to his plate. My mother's face blanched, the fragile smile cracking into something small and animal. My father, who had always been the pillar, looked older by a decade in an instant, his jaw hard, eyes calculating like I had never seen before. They tried to interrupt, to explain, with phrases that sounded rehearsed even as they stumbled through them. Pleas about protection, about how the truth would have caused pain, arguments that had been used for years to silence others. But I had already dismantled those defenses publicly. I had emailed copies of the documents to family members who had a stake in the truth, to an editor at a local paper who had been curious when I phrased questions as concern, and to a lawyer who had agreed to review everything if things escalated. When they stood to plead, a cousin produced a forwarded copy of correspondence showing financial irregularities, and a family friend produced dates and names that linked back to my parents' earlier deceptions. The room no longer belonged to them. For the first time in my life, they were on the defensive, scrambling to patch a reputation that had been built on deliberate erasure. The way they tried to rewrite the story, claiming noble motives, invoking protection and circumstance, sounded thin in the presence of facts. Daniel tried to reach for my hand, a gesture meant to anchor us back to the old roles, but I pulled away.
His avoidance over the years had been a quiet betrayal, and tonight I would not allow reconciliation to be weaponized against me. He stood there, torn between the man he had been taught to be and a conscience I had finally forced into motion. And for a moment, I saw the boy who had once hidden my secret toys from a thunderstorm, and the man who had chosen silence when truth would have mattered most. When the police officer the lawyer had called arrived, the evening moved from family drama into a legal exchange. Statements were taken, and my parents' accounts were scrutinized. Neighbors and extended family who had once joked about small-town gossip now craned in to hear details, and the shame that had lain like a soft blanket over the household flared into open flame. In the days that followed, there were calls I had expected. Angry, pleading, bargaining, and calls I hadn't. Questions from reporters, a woman whose voice trembled with relief as she confessed she had always suspected something was wrong but was too afraid to act. The fallout was messy and public in ways that both terrified and liberated me. There were hearings and interviews, confrontations where my father refused to look me in the eye, and my mother broke down into a ragged, real grief that was neither wholly repentance nor performance. I watched them suffer, and I felt a jolt of pity I hadn't anticipated, a human response to watching people you once loved become small. Revenge had never been about crushing them physically. It was about reclaiming the narrative they had stolen, about placing my life back in the center where it belonged. When their world narrowed to calls from lawyers and the sting of social censure, mine widened with possibilities I had not allowed myself to imagine when I was a child who believed in perfect families. I changed my name, legally this time, reclaimed the birthplace and identity the paperwork had stolen, and began to rebuild with the truth as my foundation rather than their lies. Some nights guilt visited me, like a cold guest. I would lie awake thinking of the woman whose life had been erased, of the faces around that dinner table, and of the boy who had stood with silent complicity. I forgave in small increments, not to absolve them, but to unchain myself. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing how to carry the story forward without letting it define every breath. In the quiet after the storm, I found new work that used my anger for something constructive. Advocacy for those whose identities had been stolen, helping others navigate the bureaucracy that had once been used to destroy someone's life. People called me brave, a label that still felt foreign, but also strangely earned. There were relationships I lost, some friends who couldn't bear the public spectacle, family members who doubled down on loyalty to the wrong things, and relationships I found, including people who admired a stubborn refusal to be invisible. I moved out of the house that felt like a stage and rented a small apartment with light and space to paint again. My canvases began to reflect harsher colors, bolder strokes, a person remade by pain, but not defined by it. There were nights when the old loneliness returned, sharp and hollowing, but more nights when I felt entire and whole, knowing I had done what I had to do to reclaim myself. Revenge had been a path, not to joy, but to truth. And truth, I learned, is a strange kind of freedom. It doesn't erase scars, but it teaches you how to carry them like medals of survival. I walked away from that house with a folder of documents, a changed name, and a sense of agency I had never been allowed. When I lastly saw my parents, months later at a courthouse hearing, they looked at me like strangers might, full of history, but stripped of the easy access to my life they once enjoyed. I felt no triumph in their ruin, only a complicated recognition that the person who had hurt me had also been once integral to the life I needed to dismantle to become myself. Standing there, I realized that my revenge had not merely been about punishment, it had been about making space for honesty, for repair, and for the reclamation of self. I did not return to the old rituals. Instead, I made new ones. Painting mornings, long walks, gatherings with people chosen for their truthfulness, and work that helped others whose names had been quietly erased. The world I built after the lies was smaller in some ways, truer in others, and entirely mine.